I believe, as many do, that the Palestinian issue is the moral issue of our times. And obviously, we're all very deeply disturbed by what is happening in occupied Palestine. Again, particularly to prisoners. Now, I think the word prisoners is a misnomer, because I think the thousands of Palestinians languishing in Israeli prisons, for the most part, are hostages as much as the hostage Israelis were hostages in Gaza. That they're treated differently by the press is nothing but a propaganda ploy, in my own view. And in fact, it appears that the hostages in Gaza were treated much better than Palestinians are being treated in prisons. And I think after October 7th, the treatment of Palestinian prisoners is only getting worse. First of all, has been at least touched upon, rape is now being used by Israel in a systemic way against Palestinian prisoners. We've seen these videos where, in fact, Israeli guards are raping Palestinians on camera, filming themselves doing it. You have the terrible story of Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, who was taken custody during the genocide and who was literally raped to death. And we are hearing more and more incidents of people, from after returning from prison, talking about being raped by human beings and also by dogs. I mean, it's not a happy thing to talk about, but apparently that is happening as well. And in terms of the organ harvesting, I mean, that appears to be a very real thing. I would submit for your review a very good article by the Healthcare Workers for Palestine in Mondaweiss, dated February 22nd, 2025, called A Brief History of Israel, Organ Theft and Trafficking of Palestinian Organs, in which they detail accounts of this going on for at least the last few decades. I think there's enough testimony from people, from relatives of Palestinian prisoners and people and Palestinians killed by the Israelis, of their bodies coming back without organs, including without eyes. Also, admissions by various Israeli physicians admitting to organ theft and trafficking, that we have to believe this is happening. And of course, for Muslims, having a body of a loved one with organs taken out of their bodies prevents, proper burial of their loved ones. And so this is a crime in and of itself against Palestinians, and I think an intentional one at that. And again, even short of these very grisly crimes that are being carried out, it's very clear, again, as we're seeing from prisoners being released as part of this so-called ceasefire, which, by the way, appears to be pretty much over anyway. We see the people were regularly beaten and mistreated in various ways. We, of course, have the case of probably the most famous and most popular Palestinian politician, Marwan Barghouti, who was recently beaten unconscious in Israeli custody. And his family's very worried about whether he'll even survive the custody. And of course, the Israelis will do everything they can to either kill him or destroy him so that he cannot lead Palestine when released. These things are unacceptable. As the gentleman who was on the flotilla talked about, when you have people from Europe and other countries, when you have a Greta Thunberg, who was once Time Magazine's Person of the Year, when you have them being tortured in Israeli prisons, what that shows is if the Israelis are willing to do that to them, they're willing to do it to anybody. And you have at least several cases of Americans, Palestinian Americans, young Palestinian Americans, teenagers, who have been arrested on the flimsiest of pretexts in the West Bank very recently, and who are being held now without charge, being mistreated. And the U.S. Embassy doesn't even show up to help or question what is happening to them, or even check to see if they're okay. And it's that sort of impunity that is allowing these crimes to happen. Israel's not being held to account for any of these crimes, for some of the worst crimes imaginable. They're not being held to account by the international community, by the countries whose citizens are being mistreated by Israel. And that's what allows this to happen. One of the commentators said, oh, international law forbids all this, and we need international law to prevent this. Well, how's that going to be done? Exactly. I agree with President Gustavo Petro, who's actually a personal friend of mine, that the only way to deal with this is through some armed military intervention to stop this from happening. The type of humanitarian intervention that the U.S. often calls for in other countries, right? And I think that the UN needs to use the Uniting for Peace resolution to end around the Security Council to make that happen. That is the only thing that will stop this. Israel and the United States, which is the key backer of Israel, made it clear international law doesn't apply to them, right? The U.S. just backed out of the Human Rights Council for the second time. Those are my views. It's not a happy situation, but that's the reality. And I hope that the measures needed will be taken to stop these crimes. Thank you very much.